Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics with a fun quilting tutorial today. This quilt was designed by Wilmington Fabrics. This is from their Sandalwood collection, coupled up with a caramel macchiato, and the quilt is called Ripples. It's a good size quilt, almost twin size, and I love that even if you're a beginner, you can absolutely be successful making this quilt, and I'll talk you through the process. It's actually this one block made again and again, and the way that it's turned and sewn together creates the amazing design that you see behind. Hey, this is a free download. We do have some limited kits available of the one you're seeing behind me. If you are in love with that particular color combination, which I think is very unique, it's more masculine, and it's hard to find quilts that maybe are great for the guys in our life. So I think this is one that you might want to consider if you do have someone in your life that maybe you enjoys that kind of more basic color palette, not flowers and not bright and vibrant. And I think it's a really special look. These don't come along that often. So we do have a free download available though, if you want to use your own fabrics in whatever color array you want, or if you are going to be purchasing the kit, this is what that kit's going to look like. All of your 10-inch squares will be pre-cut for you, and then your inner border, your outer borders, and your binding will be included here as well. And just pick the backing of your choice. The full color pattern will be included inside your kit as well. Let's just dive into this project and I'll show you how easy it is. You're going to be amazed at how simple it is to put these blocks together. They're nice and big blocks, so the quilt actually comes together faster than you might expect. Our instructions have us taking our 10-inch squares, and you're either going to cut that in half, both vertically and horizontally, to create 5-inch squares, or sometimes they have us take the 10-inch squares and cut that into 2.5-inch. That's it. That's the whole thing about building the center of that quilt. So let's just dive into how we make our little 4-patch units. We have our 2.5-inch square of a cream and a dark, and we'll just place those right side together, and I'll just repeat that for a second time with a different set of fabrics. Of course, that's one of the things I love about this design. It's very scrappy. You can put the fabrics anywhere you like. Of course, no two blocks need to be identical. You can completely make them different, and I love that. I love that kind of scrappy look, yet the quilt is still quite organized. And we're going to sew a 1/4-inch seam allowance. Be accurate on the piecing, pin if you feel you need to. I like to warm up seams. It seems like once I do that, the fabric is more pliable. It's more willing to go in the direction I want it to go in. And at this point, I'm going to press to the darker fabric. Even if you use a cream and a darker cream, press to the darker cream. Once I have those pressed to the dark sides, now I have interlocking seams. See that? Those are moving in different directions, and that helps that seam lie nice and flat, and I get a nice point there. So let's again sew a 1/4-inch seam allowance. Now we have a choice for pressing. You could either press, well, let me tell you what I would not recommend. I would not recommend pressing to one side or the other right now. You could either press your seam open and evenly distribute that, or, well, and of course to do that, you're just going to open up that seam and just press. There's another technique where you can kind of open this up in the middle, so to speak, and it creates this cute little 4-patch almost in the middle. And the seams all are now moving in the same direction, if you can see that. So I'm trying to keep my head out of the way so you can see how that works. It's kind of a neat feature. So either way works well. Some people don't like opening seams, and this is their preferred approach. Some people like opening seams. It doesn't really matter. Pick your method and just keep that consistent. So that's how we take care of the 4-patch portion of our block, because that's what's right here. Let's just look at this upper portion. You can see we have half square triangles and 4-patch, and that's it. Now with the layer cakes, the 10-inch squares that you cut into 4 pieces, those are yielding 5-inch squares. We're simply going to place them right side together, and you can either draw a line from diagonal to diagonal and sew on the 1/4 inch away from that. That's how I learned back in the day. A friend taught me that at a quilt retreat. And you're just sewing on either side. Or you can, of course, new tools have been invented as needs have, people have requested those tools. You can use a tool like this from Creative Grid, where you place this on the diagonal and you draw that line. Now, instead of having to seek the 1/4 inch seam allowance, you simply sew on the line. I know it's a lot easier to sew on a line than to hope you've got a 1/4 inch seam allowance away from a line. So hopefully that makes sense. Hey, let's just sew that together like that. I'll just sew down one side and sew up the other directly on the line. So I definitely wanted to show you that technique. On the first ones that we did, we drew the line and sewed on the 1/4 inch away. So in new tools, your preference, again, whichever method you decide you want, I would recommend you stay with that approach for all of your blocks versus kind of a mixing and a matching. So let's go ahead and separate those. And we will again press to the dark side. So let's move our spinning mat out of the way. And we've sewn some other ones in advance just to save us a little bit of time, because I want to show you, like I mentioned, even if you're a beginner, I love quilts that look more complicated than they are. This is like that. And you can see that just making some half square triangles and a 4-patch, sewing them together to make a block, and you're repeating that. And then as you can see on the next page, it's just a matter of orienting them and sewing them together. Such a simple project with a spectacular look. And I love that a big quilt can come together easily in a day. I love that. I love that. I've had those projects that I've worked on for years that are not in that quilt in a day category. And it's fun to be able to do a quilt like this in just a day. All right, once we have everything, let me move that completely out of the way. Once you've made your half square triangles and your 4-patch, I really recommend you lay the block out before you approach the sewing machine. I would make all of your half square triangles and all of your 4-patch and lay them out. The last thing you want is to start sewing rows together and then find out later you wished you'd had a different arrangement. I know it's going to take a lot of space on your floor, but I do think that it's worth that to kind of have a nice kind of a preview of what the quilt's going to look like before you start sewing things together. So I'm just now using this part of my pattern, following obviously lights and darks to lay this out, seeing if I like that arrangement. Maybe I don't like that because of the proximity of that, and so perhaps I'll use this here. That's the part of being able to preview in advance. That's the advantage of laying things out. Now you'll have far more variety inside your kit because you have so many different fabrics. I've just got a limited amount here, but you can see studying this quilt, there's this nice creams and kind of caramel colors and light brown and dark brown and everything in between. So mix that up and just get a nice pleasing arrangement. See how that was up here? I wouldn't do that because of this proximity, but I will rotate that like that, and maybe I'll rotate this out so those two aren't next to each other. Just stuff like that. That's how I kind of approach laying out projects. Maybe this one over in that corner, and this one here, and maybe this one here. I like that. So examine that one more time. Make sure that's what you want. And these extra sections like this right here, you want to clip that away now. You don't want to deal with that later on when you're sewing those blocks together. Now the half square triangle units as well as the 4-patch should measure 4.5. That's where my 4.5 ruler is gold. It's got this nice vertical and horizontal lines as well as that bullseye right in the middle. And for half square triangles, I have this, let me turn it this way so you can see it, this black line that helps me square my block. So if you did sew with a scant quarter, now there may be something to trim up, but notice that we just sewed 5-inch squares together and really there's nothing to square up, but it's a good check. So let's say that there's just a little bit here. I can just trim that up. And now this is much more likely to go into my project and just work in seamlessly. So I would definitely recommend the 4.5-inch square up ruler for that very reason. So this one here, see, I am a little bit long on that one. So I will check all these because we are going to sew this block together. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab my spinning mat. I really recommend that when you square up blocks that you always do it in conjunction with a spinning mat. Why? Now you don't have to touch the fabric. You can rotate this around you without you disturbing the fabric. So I'll lay this down like this. Again, I've got my nice line. And ideally, if I square up a block, I want to square up some on all 4 sides, not just 2, 4. Bias the ruler so you get to trim off some on all 4 sides. So I'm going to actually go do that and make sure our blocks are truly squared up to 4.5. And then when I come back, let's sew our block together. Okay, I've got those blocks squared up to 4.5. And per our instructions, we're just going to be sewing these rows together. And then, of course, sewing those into a full block. So with right sides together and absolutely pinning as needed. And make sure, I've done this before, I have rotated blocks on my way to the sewing machine and sewn the wrong side together. So let me just point that out one more time. It's very easy to do that when because you can see if I make this rotation, I will now sew the wrong side together. So make sure that stays upright. And then we'll do the next one here. And the next one. And we'll take that to the sewing machine, sewing a real nice solid 1/4-inch seam allowance. Let me point out something to you. This is like this right here. When I go right sides together and I come to the sewing machine, do you see this seam right here? If that stays on the bottom, it's blind to me, it's on the bottom. The chance of that rolling back is quite high. I don't like rolled seams. They lead to blocks that don't lie flat. For that reason, I'm going to rotate this 180 degrees, and I'm going to sew from this side because now that puts the seam up top with me, and it's flowing in the direction that I'm traveling in, and I will not get a rolled seam. That's just some of the things that you learn in time when you're doing accurate piecing to help you prevent rolled seams and things like that. So don't be afraid to take that into consideration to help increase your accuracy and reduce things like rolled seams. Once you're kind of back and forth to the sewing machine, it's easy to kind of lose your layout. What was that layout? Sometimes people will take a photo with your phone to help you get reoriented if you really liked that layout versus kind of like that's not right. And for sure we didn't have 2 fabrics like that. Were we up here? No, probably that one was here. And so there's some other things that you could be doing that will help you get the layout, keep the layout that you enjoyed and you took the time creating. So that I just like to lay that out. And then we just want to consider, how are we going to press the seam? Actually, I'm not even going to consider that yet until I sew the next section on here. So again, let's make sure we've got everything where we want it to be. And now we will right side together, right side together, right side together. I'll go sew those together. And when I come back, we can talk about pressing, how we want to press those rows to each other and then sew those together to create our block. Okay, so sewn those together. And again, this kind of pressing, how are we going to press this thing? When I have a block that's pieced on one side and just a blank square on the other, it's obvious. Move the bulk of that seam allowance toward that fabric that has nothing really going on except it's just a square. But when I have a lot of seams really in both like that, you can see how it's not biased toward one way or the other. In that instance, I just recommend you press your seams open. Some people even shorten their stitch length a little bit if they know they're going to press seams open versus pressing them to one side or the other, your preference. I'm going to press all of these seams open. Then we're going to lay our block out one more time to make sure everything is reoriented so that we can sew those 3 rows together to complete our block. All right, I have the 3 rows sewn together with seams pressed open. Now this is kind of our anchor. We're going to sew the top row to that and the bottom row to that, and then we'll press those open. That will complete our block. One of the things I want to point out is pinning. Pinning is now significant because we know we want these points to come out. So we are not going to lay these right side together and just pin left to right. Not a recommended technique. Instead, you'll want to stack this on top of that, and we just kind of keep taking these glances. And that spot right there, that V, my needle should pass at that point. That will capture the 1/4 inch seam. But first, we'll make sure we're stacked right here, and we'll use our patchwork pins to pin right along the seam here, as well as right there. We know that's got to come out, and we make everything else work in between. I don't know if I've ever had a perfect block in my life. You just pin where you know it needs to count, and then you make everything else fit. A little pulling, a little pushing sometimes needed. That's just the reality of quilting. Now we can sew here, but while I'm at it, I'm just going to actually pin this out of the way because I kind of want to just do this all at the same time with you. Normally I would just sew that side, cut, come back, but just to save us time, let's just do the same thing. So this is our bottom row here. Again, we'll place that right side together, being careful to pin here, and then you can pin the other locations afterward. All right, I'll keep pinning, then I'll meet you at that sewing machine. We'll sew 2 more seams and then press those open, and our block is going to be complete. Okay, let's check out our block here. Fun. I love piecing. I love applique too, but it's really fun sometimes when you can just piece. You can just focus on that. Pinning is so important. These are the patchwork pins. I love too that the glass head, if I accidentally leave a pin in, and I discover that maybe during pressing, that the iron will not melt those. There's some inexpensive pins where this is plastic, and I can't recommend these patchwork pins enough for their precision and the fact that that's a glass head. I love that. Okay, so let's see how we did. I feel like our block has come together beautifully. And again, we would just take the time to press that open. But I'm going to warm up the seam here because it seems like when seams want to stay closed like that, if I warm them up, they are much more likely to just open for me, just like that. Did you see how that kind of happened? And I like that. I want the block to lay as flat as it possibly can. And then of course I just continue on pressing here. So let's take a look at our block. I won't bore you with pressing, but that's how simple it is to put our blocks together. Simply repeat the blocks, and as I showed you here on the layout, be sure to once again lay those blocks out and make sure you have an arrangement you love, maybe switching them around, and then you'll just be sewing rows together. And then again, pressing the seams open, inner borders, outer borders, and there you have a really good size quilt. So hey, thank you for letting me show you how easy it is to make this block and make this beautiful quilt. If you haven't already subscribed to our channel, be sure to do that. There's so much coming your way. We are busy every day designing new projects for you, and let a friend know as well. It's really fun. We can do projects together. So we'll see you soon on another Shabby Fabrics tutorial.